Welcome to the debate. Think about a standard dining room chair. You bought it to sit on, obviously, but right now if you look around your house, it's probably covered in a pile of laundry.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, mine is holding about 3 jackets right now.
Right, it's acting as a makeshift closet. So when an object enters your home, who actually controls its purpose? Is it the designer who built it? Or, you, the user, who completely repurposed it?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, because we treat our homes like these zones of absolute freedom. We just assume that once we buy something, we are the undisputed master of it. We can do whatever we want with it.
We certainly act like it, and today we're looking at that exact tension, the friction between a designer's original intent and the user's spontaneous improvisation.
Yeah, the everyday hacking.
Exactly. And we are grounding this discussion in the foundational design theories of Madeleine Akrich, and then comparing that with the contrasting work of Uta Brandes and Michael Erlhoff.
Because it really comes down to a battle for authorship. Does an object's true value come from, strict adherence to its professional design? Or does the real magic happen when we just completely ignore what it was made for?
And my stance is that we absolutely need that strict adherence. I'm arguing for the necessity of designer control. A strong, embedded script from a professional designer is, it's the only thing keeping our functional world from just collapsing into chaos.
See, I think that absolute control is just a total illusion. True innovation doesn't happen in some sterile design studio. It happens in the messy reality of everyday life. When the user takes an object and just modifies it to fit their actual needs.
Well, let's unpack how that control actually works, because it's definitely not an illusion. It is the absolute bedrock of how we interact with the physical world. Let's look at Madeleine Akrich's 1992 theory from the description of technical objects.
Right. A classic text.
She makes this profound observation that objects are never just neutral tools waiting for us to decide what to do with them.
They come with baggage.
They come with a lot of baggage. When a designer creates something, they are writing a script. Much like a movie script or a play, they are embedding highly specific instructions, behavioral assumptions, and even moral imperatives right into the material of the object itself.
Wait, moral imperatives? So you mean rules about what is right or safe or optimal in a given society?
Precisely. The designer envisions what Akrich calls a projected user. This is a hypothetical human being in the designer's mind. They have specific physical dimensions, cognitive habits, weaknesses.
Right.
The designer then literally structures the object to force that projected user to behave in a certain way.
Force. Force is a very strong word.
But it's an accurate word. Think about a modern car seatbelt alarm. The designer wants to enforce a moral rule, right? Preserve human life. But if they just leave it up to the driver's willpower, people forget. People take risks.
So the car just annoys you into compliance?
Exactly. It delegates the responsibility of safety to the machine. The car emits an unbearable, repetitive chime until you buckle up. It translates a moral rule into a physical demand.
Yeah, it definitely does that.
That is a heavy, unyielding script. And without that kind of rigorous designer control, we lose this structured delegation. When users start ignoring the script, they risk breaking an object's intended functionality, or they bypass safety parameters that professionals spent literally years optimizing.
But wait, hold on. You're treating the seatbelt alarm like it's the gold standard for every object in existence. It's an extreme edge case.
Is it, though?
Yes, it's a life-or-death safety mechanism governed by federal laws. Most of the objects we interact with daily are not matters of life and death, which is why your view of absolute designer authority is just fundamentally flawed.
But they still have intended optimized functions that we shouldn't just casually discard. They were designed that way for a reason.
Sure, they were. But to understand why users discard them, we have to look at Uta Brandes and Michael Erlhoff, because they developed the framework of non-intentional design, or NID.
Right.
And their entire thesis is that the designer's authority is inherently temporary.
Temporary. They literally built the physical object. It's made of steel and plastic.
Yes, they built it for that projected user you mentioned, while sitting in a pristine, hypothetical studio environment. But once that object is boxed up, shipped out, and brought into someone's actual home, that projected user vanishes into thin air.
I disagree. The object still functions the same.
But the object is suddenly met by the real user, and the real user almost never matches the designer's immaculate blueprint.
Because the real user is unpredictable and, quite frankly, often undisciplined in how they use tools.
No, because the real user has dynamic, constantly emerging needs. Brandes and Erlhoff defend user-led modification not as some dangerous deviation, but as a vital form of everyday innovation.
Innovation? By turning a chair into a laundry basket?
Yes, or when someone bends a simple metal paperclip to clean their fingernails, or, to reset that tiny little button on a Wi-Fi router. They are solving an immediate, highly specific problem.
But they are doing it by misusing the tool.
What professionals dismissively categorize as misuse is actually the democratization of design authority. I mean, it proves that the everyday person is a highly capable designer in their own right. The ultimate value of an object is often discovered in these spontaneous moments, long after the original designer has left the picture.
Okay, let's slow down and define exactly how this embedded control works, because democratizing design sounds wonderful in theory, but it completely ignores the actual physical reality of how objects are made.
Okay, how so?
Well, Akrich uses a specific term to describe this process: inscription.
Right, embedding rules into the physical form itself.
Exactly. Let's look closely at how inscription functions. When a designer creates a heavy commercial door and they put a completely flat metal plate on one side and a prominent, easy-to-grab handle on the other, they are literally inscribing the commands push and pull into the geometry of the metal.
Sure, you don't even need a written sign on the door.
You don't. The object itself commands your behavior. The geometry tells your brain what to do. And when you walk up to that door and pull the handle, you are engaging in what Akrich calls description.
Description.
Right. You are reading and internalizing that implicit rule without even thinking about it.
Okay. I agree that inscription happens, obviously, but it doesn't mean the designer retains total control over every situation.
But strong inscription is exactly what makes our physical world navigable. I mean, it enforces necessary order. If we don't have strong designer control through rigorous inscription, we are relying on humans to always make the optimal choice in every scenario.
And humans are pretty smart.
But empirically, we know they simply do not always make the optimal choice. The designer's script protects us from our own fallibility and inefficiency.
I can't accept that view of the world, because the terminology of inscription only tells half the story. It assumes this perfect, unbroken transmission from designer to user.
Which mostly happens.
But it doesn't always. The vital concept to understand here is what Akrich herself and later Brandes and Erlhoff identify as displacement.
Displacement, meaning the divergence from the script.
Exactly. It is the inevitable, unavoidable gap between the designer's imagined world and the user's messy reality. A designer cannot possibly foresee every spatial constraint in your tiny apartment.
True.
They cannot predict every physical limitation you might have or every sudden urgent need you will experience on a random Tuesday.
Okay, give me an example of this gap that isn't just someone being lazy and throwing clothes on a chair.
All right, imagine you are cooking. You urgently need to prop open a hot oven door just a tiny fraction of an inch to let steam escape. Otherwise, the pastry you're baking will be totally ruined.
Okay.
You look around the kitchen frantically. You grab a wooden spoon and wedge it into the heavy metal hinge.
Completely ignoring the intended function of the spoon.
Yes, the spoon's explicit script says stir soup. But my reality in that exact second requires a wedge. And if you look closely, the spoon happens to have the exact structural properties I need.
Just by coincidence?
But it works. It's the right thickness, and because it's wood, it won't conduct the heat from the oven door and burn my hand. This placement is the space where that human ingenuity lives. I am bridging the gap between what the designer gave me and what I actually need to survive the moment.
Well, I see why you frame that wooden spoon example as a triumph of ingenuity. I really do. But let me give you a completely different perspective. Because I am deeply critical of this romanticization of user-led modification.
What is romantic about successfully propping open an oven so your food doesn't burn?
Because you're characterizing it as a stroke of genius, when in reality, It's a clumsy, potentially dangerous stopgap. A wooden spoon makes a terrible, structurally unsound wedge for a heavy, spring-loaded oven door.
It holds the door just fine.
Until it doesn't. It could easily snap, the door could slam shut, or worse, the spoon could catch fire.
But it solves the problem in the moment.
But at what cost? When you champion this idea that users should constantly repurpose things and that objects should just be completely fluid, you are essentially advocating for objects to be underscripted. You want weak rules. But leaving an object underscripted abandons the user in a void without guidance.
I don't think trusting the user is abandoning them.
Let me offer an analogy to explain why it actually is. Imagine handing someone a completely blank map. You tell them, this map is pure freedom. You can draw your own roads, you can chart your own destinations, you are the author of this journey.
Most people wouldn't know where to start with that.
Exactly. Most people wouldn't feel liberated at all. They would feel completely paralyzed. A useful map has to have explicit constraints. It has bold, unyielding lines for highways. It has distinct markers for rivers and mountains.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Those constraints, that heavy inscription by the cartographer, is what actually allows the traveler to move efficiently and safely toward a goal.
So you're saying a strongly scripted object is like a detailed map?
Yes. Without the designer's explicit constraints and intended pathways, the user is just wandering lost. The designer's intended tool for venting that oven, if inscribed correctly into the oven's design in the first place, would be vastly superior and safer than your wooden spoon.
Look, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that blank map analogy at all.
Why not? It perfectly illustrates the point.
Let me tell you why. You are assuming the user is utterly helpless without the designer holding their hand every step of the way. But everyday life shows us that users aren't paralyzed by a lack of strict instructions. They're incredibly adept at navigating their environments and reshaping the tools around them.
Reshaping? By breaking the intended rules of those tools?
By evolving them. Brandes and Erlhoff explicitly detailed the profound systemic benefits of non-intentional design. When people repurpose objects, their modifications carry highly specific, valuable traits that a factory literally cannot mass produce.
Such as what? A wooden spoon wedge is definitely not a feature a factory wants to produce.
Let's look at the actual traits of NID. First, these user modifications are often perfectly reversible.
Reversible?
Yeah, if I use a heavy, expensive coffee table book to press delicate flowers, or if I take a cleaned-out glass jam jar and use it as a pen holder on my desk, I haven't destroyed the book or the jar. The original script is still intact if I ever need to read the book or store jam again.
But you've temporarily abandoned the object's optimization. A jar is optimized for an airtight seal, not for holding pens at a convenient angle.
But I've added a much-needed function instantaneously. They are multifunctional and improvised. They respond to exact context instantly in a way no static design ever could. And crucially, they conserve resources.
How does ignoring a design conserve resources?
This is a massive point in Brandes and Erlhoff's theory. We don't need to mine raw materials, manufacture, package, and ship a brand new single-purpose plastic pen-holding receptacle across the globe.
Right.
If a glass jar already sitting in my recycling bin performs the function flawlessly.
Flawlessly is a stretch.
It holds the pens. NID proves that the everyday user is a highly effective, spontaneous designer. By utilizing objects in non-intentional ways, the user is actively overriding the professional's monopoly on determining what an object is worth.
Overriding the monopoly.
Yes, the glass jar becoming a pen holder isn't a clumsy stopgap. It is an elegant, sustainable, and immediate solution that vastly outpaces professional design in that moment.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you are entirely discounting the foundational architecture that makes the user's improvisation possible in the first place.
What do you mean? The user is the one making the connection between the jar and the pens.
You claim the user is this spontaneous genius designer, but they are only playing in a sandbox built by the professional. The user didn't invent the structural integrity of the glass jar.
Well, obviously not.
They didn't calculate the specific thickness of the glass required so it wouldn't shatter when a bunch of sharp pens are dropped into it.
That's a compelling argument. I'll give you that. But have you considered how Brandes and Erlhoff view the object itself? They argue that as objects leave the factory, they are ultimately just half-finished sentences.
Half-finished sentences?
Yes. The designer merely makes an opening move. They manufacture the glass jar, sure. They establish the material properties, but the sentence isn't finished until the user decides what goes inside it.
So you're saying the user completes the design?
Exactly. Brandes and Erlhoff argue that the designer's authority is strictly temporary. The designer gets the first word, but the user gets the final word.
That's an interesting way to put it.
When the user rewrites the script on-site, when they decide the jar is now a pen holder or the chair is now a coat rack, they are completing the sentence. They become the final author of the object's meaning in the real world. The designer has to accept that their control evaporates the moment the purchase is made.
Well, that's a very poetic way to look at it. And I appreciate the metaphor of the half-finished sentence, though I would frame it completely differently. Because the designer's control does not evaporate, it simply shifts.
Shifts to where?
It shifts from explicit instruction to structural governance. Let's look at the physical limitations set by the designer, which are incredibly resilient, even when the user thinks they're completely rewriting the script.
All right, give me an example.
Let's use your favorite example. Hanging a heavy winter coat on a dining chair. Even when a user rebels against the script of sitting and uses it as a closet, the designer's original structural choices are exactly what made that rebellion possible in the first place.
Well, because the chair has a backrest.
Right, but the designer chose the specific height of that backrest. They chose the stability of the legs and the durability of the wood to handle the torque of a heavy coat hanging off one side.
Okay, I see.
The designer's script, consciously or not, accommodates that specific action. But simultaneously, and this is the crucial part of structural governance, those same structural choices make it exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, to use that same chair as a comfortable bed.
Well, obviously, it's a chair.
Exactly. Try sleeping on a wooden dining chair. You can't do it successfully because the designer's inscription absolutely forbids it. The geometry rejects you.
Sure.
Therefore, the designer still governs the degrees of freedom the user has. You say the object is a half-finished sentence? Fine. But the designer provided the vocabulary, the grammar, and the syntax. The user can't just write in a completely different language.
So you're arguing that true freedom is impossible because of the physical limits of the object itself.
I'm arguing that the highest form of designer control isn't necessarily locking down every single microfunction with an annoying chime, like the seatbelt alarm. The absolute mastery of design is actively designing the openness.
Designing openness? That almost sounds like a contradiction in terms.
It's really not. Think of a beautifully designed, simple wooden floating shelf. It doesn't scream at you to only put encyclopedias on it. It manages its openness gracefully.
Right, you can put whatever fits on it.
Exactly. It allows you to place books or a vase or framed photographs or a trailing plant, but it still remains structurally sound. It remains safely mounted to the wall, holding up to 50 pounds without collapsing. The designer is still orchestrating the entire experience.
Even if they don't know exactly what the experience will be.
Exactly. They are managing those degrees of freedom to guide the user safely, even when the user feels like they are making a completely independent choice.
You know, I actually think we are uncovering the bridge between these two seemingly opposed philosophies right now.
How so?
Essentially acknowledging that the strict, unyielding script of Akrich's early examples, like the forced push and pull of the heavy door, the incessant beeping of the seatbelt arm, isn't the only way a designer asserts authorship.
It's a spectrum, yes.
Right. So if a designer creates a shelf, knowing it will primarily hold books, but also anticipating that the user might place a trailing ivy plant on it, the designer is actually anticipating the non-intentional design.
They are anticipating the displacement, yes.
Exactly. They are designing with the real user in mind, knowing the user will inevitably repurpose the space and blur the lines of the original script.
Yes, I can certainly see that. So if we summarize where we've arrived, my position remains firm on this foundational point. The designer's script is the indispensable, necessary foundation of our material world.
You still want the cartographer drawing the map.
We desperately need the cartographer to draw the map. Without the deliberate, professional inscription of rules, structural limits, and safety parameters, objects would simply fail to serve their primary reliable functions. An entirely underscripted world truly would be chaotic and inefficient.
Fair enough. And my position remains that the user is undeniably the final author of the object's lived reality.
Naturally.
An object's true, lasting value and often its most sustainable applications are frequently discovered in its non-intentional, spontaneous modifications. The glass jar as a penholder, the wooden spoon wedged in the oven door. Even the spoon. It is the everyday user who brings the object fully to life, overriding the initial blueprint when necessity actually demands it.
Yet I think we have found a highly significant point of convergence here today. Both of these theoretical frameworks, Akrich's concept of inscription by the professional designer and Brandes and Erlhoff's concept of reinscription or modification by the everyday user, they aren't actually opposing forces at all.
Right. They are two ends of a single, continuous authorship cycle.
Precisely. The design process doesn't just abruptly end when the object leaves the factory floor, nor does it magically begin from scratch when the user unboxes it at home.
The highest mastery of design, it seems, involves writing a very strong, structurally sound opening sentence, while deliberately leaving the exact right blanks for the user to fill in later.
Beautifully said.
It's about creating an object that is robust enough to fulfill its primary script flawlessly, yet gracious enough to accept the user's rewriting when the context inevitably changes.
Which means that understanding both of these theories profoundly changes the way we view the built environment. It forces us to look differently at the mundane, everyday things surrounding us.
It really does. I mean, I would encourage anyone listening to look around their own home or office right now. Look at your own misused items. Look at the stack of unopened mail sitting on top of the microwave. Or, the heavy textbooks propping up your computer monitor to make it the right height.
We've all done that one.
Right. You are looking at this exact philosophical tension in action.
You are looking at the precise moment where the designer's strict script met your messy reality, and you made the conscious choice to rewrite it. It brings us right back to the idea of a play.
How so?
A brilliant piece of theater requires a masterful script to give it structure and meaning. But it only truly breathes when the actors bring their own unpredictable, lived experience onto the stage, finding nuances the original creator never could have anticipated.
Oh, I like that.
The beauty isn't found in rigid obedience to the blueprint, nor in the total abandonment of it.
It's found in the tension between the two.
Exactly. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Debate.